Hello and welcome to today's workshop, Asset-Based Community Development with the Office of City and Community Engagement. This workshop is brought to you by Pathfinder. Pathfinder is an extracurricular program for incoming first and second year Northeastern students, and we provide a safe and inclusive space for students to discuss and pursue their passions. If you haven't already joined Pathfinder, you can sign up on our website. Our applications are rolling and open to first and second year Northeastern students. Also on our website, you can find links to moderator applications, which are open to third, fourth, and fifth year Northeastern students, as well as recent graduates. And if you're looking for more information about the program or additional resources, that can also be on our website. If you're looking to see more of our workshops from earlier this semester, you can check out our YouTube channel or our podcast. And I will now pass it over to the Office of City and Community Engagement.
Great, thank you so much for that lovely introduction. Today, we are going to be talking about community engagement and what that means within your community, how to define your community, and how that can lead to social change. So before we dive in deeper, we are the Office of City and Community Engagement, CCE for short, and the team of civic engagement and community service talking to you today. And we just want to introduce ourselves. So my name's Lexi. I am the Operations and Programs Assistant at CCE on co-op. I'm a rising third year student studying International Affairs and Cultural Anthropology with a minor in Spanish.
Thanks, Lexi. Hey guys, I'm Caroline. I'm another CCE co-op working on the ACES program, which is the Alliance of Civically Engaged Students. That's a program I joined my incoming freshman year. So it's a program mainly for incoming freshmen. But there are other programs that we put on that everyone can kind of get involved with. So we will plug that at the end. I'm a rising fourth year. I'm a psych and health science major, also a Spanish minor. I've also worked with the service learning department as a TA and the Mass Promise Fellowship, which is an AmeriCorps program. I was their work study student, I guess you could say, last semester.
Thanks, Caroline. So I'm Allison, and I'm also on the Community Service and Civic Engagement team as the Community Service Program Assistant Co-op this semester, and I run the Community Volunteers Program, which is a semesterly opt-in program for students at any point in their academic career, and you get placed with a different community-based organization in the Boston area to volunteer with throughout the semester. So I'm currently a master's candidate in the International Affairs program, and I'll be finishing up this summer. And I got my bachelor's at Binghamton University, and I'll be continuing on to get my PhD in global studies at the University of California, Irvine. Oh, it's not letting me change the slide. Give me one sec. There we go.
Cool. So now that you know a bit about us, we're going to talk about community engagement, why it's important, why we're really presenting to you guys today about community engagement. So first off, community engagement is engaging responsibly and ethically in your community, while also fostering reciprocal relationships with community members. So all this being said, community engagement can happen literally anywhere. Community is in every area and every aspect of your life. You will always be in a community, whether that be a physical space you are in, a more like fostered family that you are in, really wherever you find yourself, you can create community. So for example, here at Northeastern, community can be the Northeastern population. It could also be the Boston population. It could also be a specific Boston neighborhood that you live in. But the point is that it is your responsibility as a member of that community to help support it and amplify its assets. And the main point of community engagement is to work towards social change and to help out everyone around you. However, you are also going to be developing your own skill set while you're working with community engagement. So you can gain skills such as collaboration, empathy, self-reflection, sort of these soft skills that you might not necessarily gain in a classroom setting. That is completely independent of your major, course of study, whatever you want to do in your life.
So as we get started with the presentation, we have some terms we want to go over with all of you so that you can kind of see different things that we work with and how we define things in our office and with our team. So the first term is asset-based community development, which is the lens that we tend to work through and promote when doing community engagement type work. So asset-based community development, which is abbreviated as ABCD, is a development strategy based on the already existing strengths of a community. So basically, when we promote this, instead of going into a community thinking you know what they need, we want you to go into a community looking at their strengths that already exist within that community and finding ways that the community can capitalize on those strengths. So the opposite of this would be a deficit-based approach, which is going into a community looking at what they don't have, what you think they need, and already having a negative lens and negative perception of that community. That's not going to help them. That's going to just give you a negative perception. So another way we also promote using this approach, the asset-based approach, is to respond to the community based on what they say they want and need and not what you think they need. So this prioritizes listening to the community and responding to after you listen to what they say they need or want.
Yeah, so ABCD definitely something that we use in every aspect of our life as a co-op. It's also just something that you can use going into any type of community. So I'm going to talk a bit about mutual aid. You may or may not have heard of mutual aid before. There is an NU mutual aid at Northeastern that Lexi will talk about a bit later. But mutual aid as a concept is the voluntary reciprocal exchange of resources or services for mutual benefit. So mutual aid projects are forms of political participation that people can take, where people take responsibility for caring one another and changing political conditions. So mutual aid is really members of a community coming together and working with their strengths and kind of sharing those strengths among themselves. So it's less about other people coming into a community and giving what they think that the community needs, and more about the community helping each other out. So if I'm really good at farming, for example, I can be like, okay, hey, I'll give you fresh fruits and vegetables, but I'm really bad at fixing things and my door is broken. So if someone's really good at fixing things, they'll come over, fix my door for me. I'll give them some fruits and vegetables in exchange for that. So it's just sort of a different idea of exchangement of goods as opposed to, capitalism. So that's pretty much mutual aid. We'll go into that a bit more later as well.
Yes, mutual aid is absolutely lovely. The last term we want to go over before we dive into things is town and gown. Town and gown is a term used to describe the historical separation and tension between the community and the perceived elitism of institutions of higher education. So any tension that comes as a result as a university being in a community space, and we'll go into more specifics as we dive into the history of community engagement in Boston. So with that, I'm gonna pass it over to Allison again.
Thank you. So as we mentioned, town and gown, that's going to involve a bit of historical context. And so before we go into historical context, I'm just going to give a brief overview of what root causes are. So when thinking about history and why certain organizations exist, you want to understand the root causes of the organizations to understand why these organizations need to exist and the things that they're actually addressing within a community. A root cause is an underlying social, historical, and economic factor that contributes to the existence and continuation of a social issue. So examples of root causes are systems of oppression, which lead to racism, classism, homophobia, sexism, or ableism, or other things. Certain historical events can be a root cause. Different institutions, such as government, education, law enforcement, medical, or religious institutions. There are community norms or ideas that create stereotypes, which can be root causes, and then the representation or lack thereof representation or state-sanctioned public policy can all be examples of different root causes of an organization or a social issue. And so when trying to address root causes and really thinking about them in a deeper way, you should think about how your work addresses root causes of an organization's existence, what opportunities exist for you to learn more about these root causes, and what actions could you take if you were interested in engaging further in addressing root causes in your community. And the reason we prioritize and emphasize root causes is so that when we learn the historical context of an area, you're able to dive a little bit deeper beyond the historical context and understand the roots.
So using what we just learned about root causes, now I want to take this opportunity to really dive into the history and why it's important when doing community engagement work. So learning your community's historical context really allows not only for personal growth of your own knowledge, but it also helps you address the roots of the issues and grows your ability to really help the community and be an asset to the community along with the community. And so just for some context, for historical context, Northeastern is situated within 4 different Boston neighborhoods. There's Fenway, Mission Hill, Roxbury, and South End. So that makes us community members of all of those. And so tying in what we learned about the term town and gown, there's definitely town and gown between the city of Boston and our university, Northeastern. Some examples of this could be taxes, the prices of housing, student conduct. For example, if students are being loud and not being mindful of the neighborhoods they're living in, and that they are not the only people sharing that space. Accessibility and just the physical space and location itself. And so there are so many specific historical context examples within the city of Boston that could easily be dived into, have their own presentations, but just to really give a brief overview of some big topics that affect this work, first would be redlining. Simply put, redlining broke up neighborhoods. This happened a lot in Boston, but also other cities across the country. And it broke up the neighborhoods into 4 categories, with the best being colored green, and as they called it, hazardous, the most hazardous being colored red. And so this turned into a map, really separating neighborhoods, and this led to blockbusting, which was a concept that lowering the value of white homes will result with more people of color moving in. And then that turned into white flight, where white people were moving out of the city and into the suburbs because of this fear of blockbusting. And so redlining just really had a lot of negative impacts that can still be seen today, especially through urban renewal and gentrification. Beginning in like the 1990s, like I said, with white flight, a lot of white suburban families began moving back to Boston. However, the increase of college students living in these areas and neighborhoods rather than on campus led to a more younger generation. And then that means that businesses have to kind of reevaluate where they're giving their attention, and then that can push people out of the communities that were there first and lead to gentrification, which if you walk pretty much any of the neighborhoods that we live on, as we're college campus living in these 4 neighborhoods, you can see the difference in streets being catered to college students and businesses where compared to the people that were living there first. So those 2 issues really tie hand in hand and still have large impacts on Boston today, along with the Boston school desegregation, which has a lot of history, but simply put, there was busing that occurred where they would bus, and with goals of desegregation, white students into predominantly Black schools and Black students into predominantly white schools, an attempt of desegregation, but this led to a lot of tension. Families were not happy, and desegregation did not go well, and there's still large disparities within the Boston public school system today. So all of these topics and so many more really affect the setup of communities today. If you're interested in learning more specifics, I highly recommend looking up redlining in Boston, the Boston school desegregation, urban renewal and gentrification, to pursue your own research to gain a better understanding and deeper understanding. There's lots of great resources out there. But with this brief historical context, hopefully it can take us through the rest of the presentation. And with that, I'll leave the history spiel.
Thanks, Lexi. I know all of those terms may seem kind of big right now, especially if you haven't heard a lot about them before. And they are, which is why we did not delve super deep into all of them. There's definitely a lot more to learn. There really always is. And so now I will talk about a brief personal tangent because we're gonna mix it up a bit. So I grew up in a suburb of Boston, right, like north of here. And I was super close to Boston my entire life. I would go in, to like Newbury Street to shop when I was in middle school because I felt cool, or like other areas of Boston, like the Common, stuff like that. But I honestly did not really know very much about the city of Boston or its history at all. I didn't learn it in school, even though I was extremely close to the city. Never really learned about it in my personal life, but I would always just kind of hear murmurs of like, oh, don't go near like Roxbury, it's a bad area. Don't go on like this part of the city, like it's dangerous, stuff like that. And so coming into Northeastern, I had those perceptions of each neighborhood in Boston. Even though I had zero historical context, I had zero ideas of what the neighborhoods were actually like because I had never actually been to them. And then I joined ACEs, and part of our programming is learning about the history. So I'm just going to talk a bit about how to kind of unlearn a bit. It is always a constant process. So if this is the first time you're hearing about any of these terms, that is totally fine. If you have had some of those preconceived notions about certain neighborhoods in Boston, also totally fine. This is the beginning of your unlearning at that point, because that is always a constant process. It will be a process for your entire life, especially if you grew up in an area where everyone around you and the whole culture was a very much a like I grew up in a very much white upper middle class bubble. I know a lot of people at the school have, and so it's really important to just make sure that you're always paying attention to those around you, paying attention to people who kind of have this input, and who are able to do your research on your own. You know, this isn't something that you only are going to learn about if someone reaches out to you and is like, hey, want to listen to this presentation? Learning about the historical context of Boston, learning about the communities around you, that is your own responsibility to do as well. So it will always be a learning process. The point of this whole spiel is to just tell you that it will always be a learning process. It is really important to continue learning and really just be open to hearing everyone else's input as well. So hopefully that was of somewhat help. But now we are going to go into a bit of entrepreneurship, community engagement overlap. I know many of you are interested in entrepreneurship, and so we're going to talk a bit about a few statistics, numbers about community engagement. So 44% of entrepreneurs have said that their businesses have grown as a result of engaging their communities. For female entrepreneurs, this increases to 54%. So community engagement does not only help the communities around you, is not only helpful for personal growth, it's also helpful for actual business growth. Another statistic, many people may say, oh, it's too difficult to engage my community. It's too much work. I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to go about it. But in fact, entrepreneurs will see more than twice as many benefits than obstacles to engaging their communities. So definitely worth it. And then a bit, as we talked about before, about community and how we define community. 53% of entrepreneurs define their community as the place where they live and work. 43% have a different definition of community, and 4% have no definition of community. So the vast majority of people define their community as where they live and work, but 43%, so almost half, have a different definition of community. So this could be like their friend group, places that they travel for work, places that they spend a lot of time in, stuff like that. So after those quick statistics, we're going to talk a bit about designing programs and businesses with empathy while also being sustainable and ethical. So we'll start off again with ABCD, asset-based community development. Just to recap, that's coming into a community looking at the assets, not coming in assuming we know what needs to be done, not looking at the deficits, but rather looking at the assets of the community and really bringing those to light and just helping those to grow even more. In addition to this, we can ask what the community would like and assist in their goals. So really important, assist in the goals of the community. The community knows best. And then again, concept of mutual aid. It is awesome. Highly recommend it for everyone. The one on campus is super cool. Get involved. But it's really just the idea that everyone is helping everyone. Everyone has so many skills. Everyone can be useful in some sort of way in the community. So this really just brings together a community because it is building kind of that community spirit as well as helping everyone out. So those are just some things to keep in mind while you're looking at programs and businesses, especially if you are looking at kind of creating businesses. There's often lots of businesses that already exist, and it is not necessarily the most productive to go in and be like, oh, I see this thing that this community needs, I'm going to create this business, because oftentimes there are already people in that community who have that same idea, and instead of bringing your own idea in, someone as an outsider, it would be better to maybe promote the business of someone who is already in the community doing the same work.
Great. Well, thank you, Caroline, for taking the time to tie together community engagement with that entrepreneurial lens. And with that, just to break up some content, I'll take my turn to share a little personal anecdote of how I've personally taken time to get involved with programming run by the community engagement, community service and civic engagement team and CCE. Tying into mutual aid and the program CVP, or Community Volunteers Program, that Allison mentioned earlier. I signed up to volunteer with the Community Volunteers Program, and I was placed with NU Mutual Aid, which does a lot of really awesome work. For example, they have a community fridge set up, and they also do a community pantry once a week, and that's where I volunteer once a week, every Thursday, 3 to 4. They bring over a ton of fresh produce. I help set it up, help pass it out, and then help clean up. And so it's a really awesome way. It's just community members, like students, bringing food for the community. And it's not only students that come to the pantry to get the food. It really shows that we have staff, faculty, and we also, it's right outside of Ruggles. So there's community members coming in and out of Ruggles. It's just a great way to really see how much of a community Northeastern is a part of, and really see how easy it can be to just be involved and contribute to your community that you're a part of. Another way that I've been participating in programming that's run by the office is I participated in a service learning class. I didn't even know it when I signed up for the class, but the class had service learning integrated in it, which meant I was placed for my class at a place to volunteer, which was Squash Busters on campus. And Squash Busters provides both access to learning how to play the sport squash, which is typically a very inaccessible sport, as well as academic tutoring. I help with the academic tutoring. I go in once a week, and not only, it's really been reciprocal relationship that I've gotten from that, because not only have I been able to provide students with academic tutoring, but I've really learned, talking back to that historical context, how the Boston public school system works and what impacts it has today. And so I've really been able, through the programming that CCE runs, along with the community service and civic engagement team, I've been able to see how social change or social impact can start to look like just with myself, and how it can look by engaging with the community as well.
Thank you so much, Lexi, and thank you for mentioning social change, because that's how we're going to wrap things up a little bit for the content of this presentation. And so one of the reasons why we do community engagement is to achieve social change. So if you are watching the presentation, I have a beautiful little wheel here, but if you're listening to the podcast, I'm going to go through and explain it. So the social change wheel was created by the Campus Compact at Iowa and Minnesota universities, and the wheel is split into 3 different parts. And it's a way to look at how social change is achieved, and that in this wheel really shows that social change doesn't happen through just one method or one path. It happens through a myriad of different activities and ideas and resources. So the way that the wheel is set up is there is an outer layer, and that outer layer is ways to work towards social change. And so some of these things are volunteering and direct service, which is a lot of what we've touched on, and socially responsible daily behavior. Then there's deliberative and reflective dialogue, which I think we've also kind of talked about with our different anecdotes, is in prioritizing reflection in this service that we are doing. Community organizing, advocacy and raising awareness, community building, social innovation and enterprise, fundraising, giving and philanthropy, community and economic development, protests and demonstrations, voting and formal political activities, and mutual aid and informal association. So that's just the outer wheel, which is the first step, which is a way to get towards social change. And so as we get closer to the center of the circle, there's a second layer, and this is campus-based strategies. So that's where, and this social change wheel is meant to be a way for college students and higher education institutions to affect social change. So the more inner layer is bridging that gap between community engagement and higher education, and showing how these 2 things can be combined to achieve social change. So some of these strategies and activities would be civic-minded career readiness, community engaged teaching and learning, engaged scholarship and participatory research. So those last two things I just said would fall under the service learning programs that our office has. Voicing the public purposes of higher education, cultivating lifelong learners and global citizens, information, digital, and media literacies, and community building and partnership. And so with combining these two layers, we hope to achieve, which is the center of the circle, anti-racism, equity, and co-creation. And so by doing only one of these things, you're not going to create long-lasting or impactful change. It's a combination of all these things. And you may only be involved in one of these things, and that's okay. But in order to understand how social change is achieved, it's a combination of all these things. You can't just do one and expect to see vast outcomes. And so I believe now I'm going to go into my personal anecdote before we end the presentation. But so I've been involved in volunteerism and engagement activities for a while. I was a Girl Scout growing up, and I ended up doing my Gold Award, which is an independent service project that you do independently towards the end of high school. And for Girl Scouts, it's around 80 hours of service, and it's your own project, and it has to be sustainable for your community. If you're not familiar with Girl Scouts, if you're more familiar with Boy Scouts, the Eagle Scout Award is the same thing, but for the Boy Scouts. So I did my award my senior year, and I created a workshop for elementary school students, and I did it with a bunch of different schools. I had so much fun. I thought it was such a good idea, but I'm pretty sure they don't use it anymore. It was not sustainable. And I really wasn't going into this project asking what schools may have needed or wanted. I just kind of had this great idea that I thought was wonderful and that kids would love. I did the workshops for a little bit, but then it never carried on. So like when I finished that project, I really had to take a step back and think about what I had done. And, you know, my impact wasn't there. I may have had good intentions, which is one thing, but my actions weren't sustainable. And so that's a really important thing to think about when you're doing community engaged work. And also as an international affairs major, I've also had more international experience with like international development and abroad volunteering. And I think that that reflection is really important, especially in that context. So in my sophomore year in undergrad, I studied abroad in Peru, which was a service and immersion program. So we lived with host families in Cusco, and we volunteered with 3 different after-school programs, or 2 after-school programs and then 1 construction program. And so when we went to this, before we started this program, we had a lot of pre-service activities and lectures. And a lot of it was to prioritize thinking about how we're going to enter this community, as most of us were white students, hadn't been out of the country before, and we're really going to be complete outsiders. And also making sure that we understood that we as students coming into these communities are not saving the community. We are not their only means to the end, you know, and it was really to avoid having a white savior complex, because I think a lot of students in more of an international setting wanting to go into that field, they think, oh, I have to be the one who creates this change. I know what other countries need. I know how to alleviate these issues. And it's kind of like, no, take a step back and really think about you're one person. If you're an outsider to these communities, you know, do you actually know what the communities need? You might see these statistics of these economic statistics, but you know, you have to really take a step back and reflect upon what you're doing. And while I think we created reciprocal relationships in my time in Peru, even having those reflective dialogues and everything doesn't mean that it was a perfect program. And I still look back on it. And while I gained a lot from it, I still don't think I gave as much as I gained. And so being able to reflect upon the different service activities that you do is going to make it more sustainable and more ethical for the future. So that is my anecdote, and I'm going to pass it on to Lexi.
Beautiful, very important lessons. Love what you could learn through personal stories. So today we covered a lot. We started with some definitions, went over root causes, historical context, how community engagement can tie to entrepreneurial lenses, and we talked about social change. Lots of stuff thrown your way. However, I hope one thing stuck with you, took away something, and that you could apply it to community engagement, however that fits in your own life. And so with that, I just want to leave you with our office mission and vision, just to tie together what we hope with our work. And so Our mission is to be an active and responsible contributor to our local and campus communities by fostering collaborative relationships and partnerships that connect, educate, and engage people and organizations throughout our network. And with that, our vision is to be a catalyst for vibrant, interconnected, and evolving networks of individuals and communities that value equity and justice as guiding and core principles in our shared work. We went over today some of the programs that we offer. Caroline talked about ACEs. Allison and I talked about the Community Volunteers Program. And before I finish wrapping us up, I want to just give Allison the opportunity to briefly talk about another great program to get involved in, which is called Jumpstart.
Yes, so Jumpstart is an early childhood education program that you can volunteer for. It is a year-long commitment. It requires around 200 to 300 hours of service, and both students, college students, and community members alike can be volunteers. So as a volunteer, you'll be working with preschoolers in predominantly lower income communities. And the point of the program is to increase the literacy of preschoolers and their socio-emotional skills. So you'll be doing lots of activities within the preschool setting, but also team building activities and leadership skills outside. So it's a really wonderful opportunity if you want a consistent year-long commitment as well and want to work with children.
Perfect. Thank you, Allison. So those are just a few examples of how to get involved with community engagement that our office provides. We also have a newsletter and many, many resources. So with that, if you are interested in learning more about what we talked about today, if you have any questions or want to figure out how to get involved, all of our social medias across Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, we are at NU Engaged. Our website, where you can find events and news articles and cool stuff, is communityengagement.northeastern.edu, and our email is communityengagement@northeastern.edu. And if you reach out to us, we can then connect you to the correct channels that properly address whatever questions, comments, or concerns you may have. And with that, we really hope you just take one thing away from this and maybe think about ways that you can get involved with community engagement, because that's what makes the world go round. So thank you for your time. And if you have any questions now, we'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you all so much. This was such a great presentation. And I had a quick question, because I love how you emphasize working with existing businesses and existing organizations. And I was an ACEs student back in the day, so I got to work with a lot of awesome places around Boston. Shout out 826, that was my selected year-long commitment that I did through the program. But I'd love if any of you could shout out some of your favorite organizations that you love to work with or that you have worked with, just to give us a little idea of your faves.
Yeah, I've worked with the Hernandez School for I think 2 years now at this point, kind of on and off with co-op, but they're awesome. I've just worked in the 4th and 5th grade classrooms, but they're all the way kindergarten through, I think 7th, 8th grade. Yeah, but they're awesome. They always need volunteers. Really cool group of kids.
Yeah, I'll shout out once again NU Mutual Aid, Squash Busters. I've also done CVP programming with Hyde Square Task Force, which is similar programming to what Caroline was talking about. There's so many awesome organizations out there.
Yeah, I'm going to throw out a couple. So I haven't gotten to work with them, but as running CVP, we partner with a lot. So there's Boston Building Resources, Community Servings, Youth Enrichment Services. Oh, there's so many. We work with 826, also Hyde Square Task Force and Hernandez After School Program. There might even be more. I think there's Fair Foods. There are so many wonderful, wonderful organizations in the Boston area you can get involved with. So take a look, just do some Google searches or reach out to us and we'll be more than happy to connect you with them.
Also, our website highlights a bunch that recently won community grants that we run. So if you're interested in learning about more of the organizations, there's a big long list of organizations on our website that you can learn from.
Oh, also maybe one more plug to our programs, but we didn't mention this because it's not as occurring, but there's the alternative spring break program. And so in non-COVID times, they do, instead of going on spring break, you would either do a local, national, or international service trip for the week of spring break, and you would be paired with a different community-based organization and serve with them for the week, and also learn about the history of the community that you're serving within. So that's another way to get to know. If you do a lot with the Boston area and want to get a broader national or international sensitive community-based organization, that's also another option.
Yeah, that's great. We'll definitely have links to all that within like the descriptions of the video and podcast. We also like to ask our hosts if they can speak about kind of like their first year in university, if they came in with a major, or if they stuck with the major that they came in with, if they have like any advice for first and second year students or anything that they wish that they knew when they started out.
I'll go. Yeah, I've switched my major like 4 times, I think. I came in as behavioral neuroscience. I decided it was way too much biology for me, and I also did not want to be pre-med anymore. So then I switched to psychology, I think, and I was doing the education master's, and then I was like, no, I don't want to be a teacher anymore. So then I did just psychology, and then I decided that I wanted more sciencey things. So now I'm psychology and health science. So I've switched my major many times. I also went from 4 years to 5 years because I wanted to add an extra co-op in. I've talked to lots of different advisors, and it's just, you can switch as many times as you want. I mean, not really, because you gotta stick, I feel like it's expensive to stay in college forever, but don't be afraid to switch it if you decide that you're really not like into your major. Also, the one piece of advice I always give people coming into college or in their first couple of years is to just try everything, because that's how you figure out what you're into. That's how you figure out what you like. If you go to one of those like club fairs or whatever, get on all the email lists. You can always take yourself off of them later. But sometimes you find community in places that you did not expect. Also, if you would like to join the women's rugby team, hit me up. Always a plug for that.
Yeah, I would say I'd never changed my major, but I did add my minor. However, I still have no idea what I want to do with it. So, and that's totally okay. But going off of Caroline's advice, my favorite thing is just very similar, like say yes to everything and keep an open mind. And also, this is something I'm still like trying to remind myself of today, and like just push yourself out of your comfort zone and just reach out to people, especially now. I find it scary at times, but then like you might have like a nice little dinner picnic or something, or catch up with someone that like you had a class with and you like really enjoyed their presence and like now haven't seen them in a long time. So for people, just like people want friends and friends want friends, you know? So just, it's okay to take the scary step of reaching out to someone first. And then who knows where it can go from there.
Yeah, I think going off all that, my advice, which someone gave to me before I started college, was don't have tunnel vision. I didn't listen to them. And I went in up as a political science major. I stayed a political science major, but I had a lot of different turns as I went on. I ended up taking a Latin class. I did horrifically in that class, but I was like, you know what, I'm going to do the second one and we're going to see what happens. And I ended up becoming a classical language major. Super weird, super wild, not useful for me anymore, but I loved it at the time. I also, going into graduating high school and going to college, I was fully on the track to go to law school. I even took the LSAT my senior year. Then all of a sudden I realized I don't want to argue for my whole life. And I last minute applied to a master's program, and that's how I ended up at Northeastern. And now I'm at Northeastern. I thought, oh no, I never want to do research for a career. I'm not going to do that. So some more tunnel vision. And now I'm going into a PhD program to do research. So don't limit yourself is what I'm saying, because you never know what opportunities are going to arise. My path, like I thought it was going to be one straightforward law school, be an attorney or litigator or something. That's absolutely not what I'm going to do. So be open-minded with yourself, and yeah, just don't limit yourself.
Such great advice. I always try to remind myself that I have another year, and I think that will do me well to keep that in the back of my mind. So appreciate it. And I'm sure our listeners will appreciate that too. Yeah, thank you so much to the Office of City and Community Engagement for working with Pathfinder. We hope to work with you in the future and we'll be in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.